Could you ever truly step into the same river twice?
Hmm.
It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? It's one of those, seemingly simple questions that once you really start digging into it, well, it just cracks open this whole universe of profound insights.
Oh, definitely. Insights about change, identity, the very nature of reality itself.
Exactly. It really challenges our most basic assumptions about what it even means for something or someone to be.
It's a concept that powerfully confronts our intuitive feel for stability, doesn't it?
Uh,
We tend to see things as, well, fixed, enduring,
mm,
unchanging.
right. Solid.
But this idea, it really invites us to look past those surface appearances, to see the dynamic, often turbulent forces that are perpetually at play underneath.
Beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's about recognizing motion, really, as the underlying truth rather than stillness.
And today, on the deep dive, we're not just dipping our toes into that idea. No, we are plunging headfirst into the mind of an ancient Greek philosopher whose ideas about that very question about relentless change, yeah, and the essential role of conflict and this universal underlying logic still ripple through how we understand the world thousands of years later.
We're talking about Heraclitus of Ephesus. You've probably heard him called the obscure philosopher.
That's the one.
And our deep dive today has a pretty clear mission, right? We want to unpack his famously enigmatic wisdom, really try to understand the turbulent world he lived in,
Get a feel for it.
and uncover why his fragmented aphoristic thoughts became, well, foundational pillars of Western philosophy, how they influence thinkers across millennia.
And when we say his thoughts are fragmented, we mean that pretty literally. Our sources for this deep dive, they aren't complete books or anything.
No, that or not.
It's more like a collection of short, sometimes really poetic aphorisms, little nuggets preserved in the writings of later philosophers, often alongside their interpretations.
Which adds another layer, of course.
Totally. It's a bit like piecing together this profound cosmic puzzle from scattered ancient clues. But that, honestly, that to me is precisely what makes this journey so exciting.
It's a challenge.
And ultimately, so rewarding,
Yeah.
Demands that we engage actively with the ideas rather than just passively receiving them like you would from a textbook. You have to wrestle with them a bit.
You really do. You become part of the interpretation process.
Okay, so to really grasp the essence of Heraclitus' philosophy, we first have to immerse ourselves in the world he lived in. Let's set the stage. Heraclitus called Ephesus home, flourishing late 6th, early 5th century BCE.
Right, a critical time.
And picture this. Ephesus wasn't some quiet, sleepy little town. Not at all. It was a bustling, vibrant trade and cultural hub, a real crossroads where, the sophisticated cultures of the Greek West met the ancient power of the Persian East.
Absolutely crucial point. Imagine a city just teeming with merchants, philosophers, artists, soldiers, all contributing to this rich, diverse, and frankly, often volatile cultural mix.
Volatile is a good word.
That backdrop is critical.
Yeah.
This era was fundamentally defined by the vigorous rise of the Greek city-states, the polis.
You're right, the independent cities.
These were self-governing urban centers, each developing its own distinct political structures, customs, intellectual traditions. But at the same time, and this is vital, the powerful Persian Empire had established a significant, often dominant hold over Western Anatolia.
Where Ephesus was located.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this created a fascinating, often tense, sometimes even explosive dynamic. You had burgeoning Greek autonomy right under the long shadow of imperial control.
Wow. So you've got these fiercely independent Greek city-states trying to forge their own identities, their own sovereignty. But they're literally operating within the sphere of influence, maybe even direct control sometimes, of this massive, imposing empire.
Precisely. So it's no wonder then that this particular period was just brimming with immense political and intellectual dynamism. It was truly a time when individual thought, individual questioning really began to blossom.
Pushing beyond the old ways.
Pushing beyond the comfortable, maybe, but often limiting explanations of mythology and tradition. You see the very foundations of rational inquiry taking root right there.
Trying to figure things out based on reason, not just stories.
Indeed. And the context of the ongoing Perso-Greek conflicts, which would eventually lead to the famous Persian Wars, plus the constant rivalries and shifting alliances among the Greek city-states themselves, all that formed a profoundly turbulent backdrop for Heraclitus' philosophical development.
You can almost feel it in his philosophy.
You can. This ceaseless state of flux, power dynamics shifting, societies clashing, established orders being questioned, it undoubtedly served as a powerful lived illustration for his core ideas about conflict and constant change.
So his philosophy wasn't just abstract thought.
No, in many ways, it isn't just about his world. It reflects and analyzes the very conditions of his time. He was observing intensely and then distilling the reality around him into these universal principles.
That makes perfect sense. So, okay, what about the man himself? Heraclitus sounds like quite the character, doesn't he? We don't have a ton of biographical info, do we?
And we don't. Most of what we think we know comes from later accounts, often anecdotal, like those compiled, centuries later by Diogenes Laertius.
It's a bit patchy.
Very patchy. Our biographical details are scarce, which only adds to that obscure reputation he has. But the fragments we do have, they paint a picture of a rather distinct, unconventional individual.
Okay, like what?
Well, he apparently came from an aristocratic family in Ephesus, which normally would have meant certain civic duties, religious responsibilities.
Civic obligations.
Yet he reportedly rejected some significant religious duties. Specifically, there's talk of him refusing the hereditary office of King of Sacrifices.
Really? Why?
It hints at this fiercely independent spirit, doesn't it? A man who clearly prioritized his own intellectual pursuits over social convention or, inherited status.
Didn't care for the ceremonies.
Seems not. And his known personality traits, or at least the ones reported, include this reclusive nature, a really critical eye, and a distinct, almost disdainful attitude towards the society around him.
Yeah, I get the sense he wasn't exactly what you'd call a people person. He's famously quoted saying, "The opinion of the majority is worthless."
Strong words.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Oh,
It really illustrates his deep disdain for conventional wisdom, for what he saw as, I guess, the superficiality and unthinking conformity of the masses.
He clearly didn't suffer fools gladly.
And he probably saw fools everywhere.
And yet, there's this fascinating paradox here, isn't there? Despite his apparent misanthropy, his really scathing critique of common understanding,
Yeah.
he supposedly left his only written work, which scholars think was probably a single collection of these aphorisms, in the Temple of Artemis.
The Temple of Artemis, that was a huge deal, right? One of the
Yeah.
wonders of the ancient world.
Exactly. A magnificent, very public, very accessible place, not some hidden cave.
So why there?
Well, it suggests this complex desire, maybe, to share his profound ideas.
Yeah.
To make his wisdom available, at least potentially, to those who might be receptive, even if he believed most people wouldn't truly grasp its depth.
Interesting. Like he knew it was important, even if people weren't ready for it yet.
It's almost as if he understood the importance of his insights for posterity, even if they were destined to be misunderstood by many in his own time. He presented his work almost like a challenge, or a test for future generations.
So like a message in a bottle thrown into the sea of time. He didn't just appear out of nowhere, though, did he? He was part of a bigger intellectual movement happening, especially in Ionia, where Ephesus was.
Absolutely. Heraclitus didn't operate in an intellectual vacuum. Far from it. He was very much a product of, and also a contributor to, the broader Ionian philosophical tradition.
Okay, what was that tradition about?
This was a pivotal period where thinkers really began to move beyond purely mythological narratives. The stories in Homer's epics or Hesiod's Theogonies, and started searching for rational, natural explanations for things.
Like, why do earthquakes happen?
Exactly. Instead of just saying, oh, Poseidon's angry, they started looking for underlying physical causes, for principles. It was the very birth of what we now recognize as scientific inquiry, in a way.
So we're talking about the pioneers here. The first philosophers asking why in a rational, systematic way. People like Thales of Miletus. Thales, who proposed water, was the fundamental principle of everything.
And Anaximander.
Anaximander, yeah, who ventured beyond a specific material substance to suggest the apeiron, the boundless, or the indefinite, as the ultimate source.
Kind of abstract.
Very. And then Anaximenes, who proposed air as the foundational element, explaining its transformations through condensation and rarefaction. They were all searching for that fundamental arche.
Yeah, arche, the ultimate principle, or origin of the universe.
Precisely. That was the big question. Now, while Heraclitus was deeply rooted in this Ionian tradition, sharing that fundamental quest for an underlying principle, he developed a distinctly unique approach, one that really set him apart.
He didn't just propose a different material for the arche. He proposed a different nature for it, one rooted in dynamism, constant change, and the inherent tension of opposites. He wasn't just trying to identify the stuff of the universe.
Hmm.
He was trying to grasp the process of its being, the way it works.
All right, so we've placed Heraclitus firmly in his world, we've glimpsed the kind of person he might have been, and we understand the intellectual currents he was swimming in. Now, let's plunge into the very heart of his philosophy. And the first thing we have to deal with is the nature of his work itself. It comes down to us through these short, often really enigmatic fragments. Some are just a few words long.
That's such a crucial starting point. His philosophy reaches us not as some systematic treatise, chapter by chapter.
That need arguments.
No, it's through these aphoristic, almost poetic snippets.
Mm.
And their riddle-like nature is both their challenge and, I think, their strength.
How so?
Well, they demand profound contemplation. They make them incredibly challenging to interpret, sure, but also immensely rich and rewarding once you start to peel back the layers.
Like little thought bombs.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand a vast symphony just from hearing a few powerful evocative notes. Each fragment is like a flash of profound insight that resonates far beyond its brevity.
Okay, so where do we start with these fragments? What's the first big idea?
Well, the first and arguably the most pivotal of these insights is his concept of logos.
Logos. Okay, that's a famous one. It isn't just a word for Heraclitus, is it? It seems like it's much, much more than that.
Oh, far, far more. Logos, for Heraclitus, is the absolutely central, pivotal concept in his entire philosophy. It represents the universal order, the underlying reason, the unifying principle, and the fundamental law of the cosmos.
Wow, that's a lot packed into one word.
Think of it as the unseen architect of reality, the governing intelligence that structures everything, from the smallest particle to the grand movements of the stars. It's the inherent logic of the universe, the pattern that reveals itself, but only to those who can truly perceive it.
So it's not some abstract, distant idea just floating out there. It sounds like it has a kind of dual nature.
That's a great way to put it. It's both the principle that governs how the universe operates, the very fabric of how things work, and it's the human mind's inherent capacity to comprehend this universal law, to align our own reason with its deep truth.
So the universe has a logic, and we have the potential to grasp that logic.
You've captured it perfectly. It's the unifying intelligence that permeates the universe. And simultaneously, it's the potential within the human intellect to grasp and live in accordance with that intelligence. But,
There's always a but with Heraclitus, isn't there?
pretty much, as we've discussed, he was quite critical of his fellow humans on this point. He famously lamented, and this is a powerful fragment, "The logos is common, most live as if they had their own understanding."
Ouch.
Yeah. It powerfully emphasizes his belief in human blindness, our pervasive tendency to miss the universal truth that is constantly ubiquitously available to us.
So we're just walking around missing it.
We're often caught up in our individual, superficial perceptions, our private worlds of opinion, failing to tune into the grand objective reality. For Heraclitus, this logos represents unity and order, but, and this is crucial to remember, this order is fundamentally dynamic, not static. It's an active, ever-present principle, not some frozen blueprint or a rigid set of rules. It's the ever-unfolding logic of existence itself, constantly in motion.
And that idea of dynamism, of constant motion and change, that leads us perfectly into his most famous idea, doesn't it? The one that probably everyone has heard in some form, Panta-rhei.
Everything flows.
Everything flows. You simply cannot step into the same river twice.
That iconic phrase, "you cannot step into the same river twice," is really the enduring summary of his principle of continuous flux and transformation in the universe. It's his most famous statement, absolutely, and perhaps his most revolutionary. Panta-rhei just captures that essence. Everything is in a constant state of becoming, perpetually changing, perpetually moving, never remaining the same from one moment to the next.
So when you step in the river, the water hitting your feet is different from the water that was there a second ago.
Exactly. But it's more than just the water. The riverbed itself changes, the banks erode, new sediment arrives, the very course of the river shifts over time.
Right. The river itself isn't a fixed thing.
Precisely. The river, while appearing to be a stable entity from afar, is actually a process, an ongoing flow, a dynamic system. And Heraclitus applied this concept to everything, didn't he?
To human beings, to society.
Absolutely, to the very fabric of reality. The river analogy is brilliant because it illustrates how something can appear superficially the same, yet be fundamentally different from one moment to the next. The river's identity is its continuous change.
So we're like rivers too.
In a way, yes. Heraclitus argued that human beings are never truly static. Our bodies, our thoughts, our very identities are in constant flux, continuously becoming. Societies are also in perpetual transformation, and the entire world is an unending process of flux. This idea is a cornerstone of his philosophy. It directly challenges any notion of a static or unchanging universe or a fixed identity. For Heraclitus, change isn't just something that happens sometimes like an accident.
It's the main event.
It's the very essence, the inherent nature of existence itself. If you're looking for stability, for permanence in the manifest world, you're looking for something that, to him, simply doesn't exist.
Yeah.
This is radical stuff, and it profoundly shapes how we might think about identity as a process, not a fixed state.
Okay, but if everything is just constantly changing, constantly flowing, doesn't that sound like pure chaos? Just randomness.
That's the common misconception. But Heraclitus didn't see it that way at all. He saw an underlying order within the chaos, or rather, through the chaos, particularly through his really radical idea of the unity and conflict of opposites.
The unity of opposites, okay.
He famously said another incredibly potent fragment, "Conflict is the father of all things."
Conflict is the father, not peace.
Conflict, strife, war, even in some translations. This is truly where his genius and maybe his obscurity shines brightest. He argued that cosmic order doesn't arise from a lack of conflict or from some static harmony,
Well,
but precisely from the dynamic tension between opposing forces. Think about it. Beautiful and ugly, good and bad, hot and cold, light and dark, up and down, hunger and satiety.
things that seem totally opposite.
Right, but they aren't separate, isolated concepts that exist independently. They are complementary. They exist in relation to each other. They define each other. And in their ceaseless interaction, their dynamic interplay, they form a unified whole.
So they need each other.
Absolutely. It's the very tension between them that generates movement, that gives rise to life, meaning, and the very structure of reality. He said the hidden harmony is better than the obvious. The harmony comes from the tension itself.
So you literally can't have hot without cold or good without bad. Their dynamic interplay creates the fabric of reality. It's almost like a cosmic wrestling match that, instead of destruction, somehow results in continuous creation and balance.
That's a great image.
Like the tension in a musical instrument string or a bowstring.
You've hit on it perfectly. Heraclitus himself used the analogy of the bow and the lyre. He said something like, "They do not understand how that which is torn in different directions comes into accord with itself, harmony in the bending back, as in the case of the bow and the lyre."
Harmony in the bending back.
It's the tension, not the slack, that gives those instruments their purpose, their power, their sound. He used other compelling examples too, like seawater is drinkable for fish, poisonous for humans.
Okay, right. Same water, different effects.
Exactly. This highlights not just the relativity of reality, what's good for one is bad for another, but how contradictions not only coexist, but are absolutely necessary for the whole system to work. What is beneficial for one entity is detrimental to another, yet both states exist within the same overarching reality, contributing to its dynamic balance.
Wow.
And this concept of dialectical thinking, this profound idea that truth and development emerge from the clash of opposing ideas or forces, well, it later influenced philosophical giants like Plato, Hegel, and Marx. It shows its profound and enduring historical impact far beyond ancient Greece. It's the very engine of becoming for Heraclitus.
Okay, so we have logos as the underlying reason, pantarei as the constant flow of all things, and the unity of opposites as the generative force within that flow. Now, Heraclitus also chose a fundamental element for the universe, right? Similar to his Ionian predecessors. But his choice was fire.
Yes, fire.
What did fire mean to him? Was it just, a physical substance like Thales' water?
Well, yes and no. Fire, for Heraclitus, was indeed the fundamental element, the arc of the universe, but it held this profoundly dual meaning. It was both a physical substance and a powerful, deeply profound metaphor.
Okay, break that down. Physical first.
Physically, fire is the ultimate symbol of transformation, isn't it? Think of how it consumes things, yet in doing so, it creates new forms. Ash, heat, light, smoke. Everything converts to fire, and everything in turn is reborn from it in this continuous, ceaseless cosmic cycle.
The ultimate change agent.
Exactly. He states, and this is a key fragment, "This cosmos, the same for all, no god nor man did create, but it ever was and is and will be eternal fire, ever living, kindling in measures and being quenched in measures."
Kindling and being quenched. Like breathing almost.
It implies this constant regulated process. So it's not just about what the universe is made of, but how it's constantly made and unmade and remade through this fiery process. It's an active agent of change.
Okay, and the metaphorical meaning.
Metaphorically, fire perfectly represents the dynamic, ever-changing nature of the logos itself. It embodies the constant flux, the inherent tension of opposites, because fire itself is a process of consuming and giving off, of burning bright and dying down, of being kindled and quenched.
It's never static.
Never. It embodies the perpetual motion that defines the universe. So, the universe, in Heraclitus' view, operates through this continuous transformation of fire, the perpetual cosmic cycle of becoming and passing away, all governed by the unchanging yet dynamically active law of logos. It's like the very lifeblood of the cosmos, endlessly consuming and renewing itself.
So fire isn't just stuff, it's process, it's energy.
Exactly. It's crucial to understand that for Heraclitus, fire isn't merely a material, it's an active principle, a living force that drives all change and maintains cosmic order through its very instability.
Wow. Okay. Now, for someone who puts so much profound thought into these universal truths, the logos, the fire, the flow, he seems to have had a pretty low opinion of humanity as a whole. He was quite the unsparing critic of humans and society, wasn't he?
He was indeed. No punches pulled. Heraclitus firmly believed that the vast majority of people were just oblivious to the logos, oblivious to the universal truth that was constantly available to them right there in front of them.
What were they doing wrong?
He saw them as thinking superficially, caught up in their private opinions, their fleeting sensory experiences, and utterly failing to grasp the true dynamic reality of the world around them. His aristocratic background and, frankly, his intellectual rigor probably fueled this disdain for the common, unexamined life.
He saw society as mostly asleep.
That's exactly the word he used. He saw them as sleepers.
So, literally asleep even when they were wide awake. That's a pretty stark metaphor.
It is. It's his famous, powerful quote, "Even when awake, most people sleep."
Wow.
He meant that people often go through life in this dreamlike state, missing the profound truths of the universe because they're too caught up in their own private illusions, their conventional beliefs, maybe just their mundane concerns.
Their day-to-day grind blinds them.
Blinds them to the deeper reality. They fail to perceive the underlying logos that governs all things. They speak and act, he thought, without true understanding, driven mostly by habit and ignorance.
And this philosophical stance, this conviction that hardly anyone really gets it, that fits with his personality, right? The solitary, reclusive guy.
It aligns perfectly. He saw himself, it seems, as one of the very few who were truly awake, truly perceiving the underlying order and dynamism of existence, while the rest of humanity just drifted through this superficial existence. He found their adherence to popular opinion, to common sense, to be a profound barrier to real wisdom.
Heraclitus was truly a radical thinker then, really pushing the boundaries of what it meant to understand the world. But as you said, he didn't emerge in isolation. He was part of this larger, incredibly significant intellectual movement.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at him within the broader context of pre-Socratic philosophy. This was really the golden age for the birth of philosophical inquiry, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. The 6th and 5th centuries BCE, they marked the true genesis of philosophy in the Western tradition. And what made it a golden age was this fundamental, critical transition.
From mythological explanations for the universe and its phenomena, the kind you find in Homer or Hesiod, to rational, systematic ones, instead of just attributing natural occurrences to the whims of the gods.
Like Zeus throwing lightning bolts.
Right. Instead of that, these thinkers, the pre-Socratics, began to seek underlying principles, natural laws, observable causes. It was a monumental leap for human thought, a completely different way of looking at the world.
And their central quest, what really drove them, was trying to understand the cosmos. Not just the universe's stuff, but the orderly, harmonious arrangement of everything.
Exactly. How the universe originated, what it's actually made of, and how it functions. That was the big question, the driving force of the era.
So they were the first cosmologists, basically, trying to figure out that fundamental principle.
Precisely. We've mentioned figures like Thales proposing water, Anaximander with his more abstract appearance, the boundless, and Aximenes thinking air was the primary substance, explaining different states of matter through its condensation and rarefaction.
Right, thickening and thinning.
Each of these offered a different fundamental stuff or principle. Heraclitus, of course, in his search for the ark, chose fire. But as we've discussed, his choice was far more nuanced, far more dynamic than just identifying a static material substance.
Yeah, it was process, not just material. And it was a massive break from tradition, wasn't it? The shift from divine explanation to rational observation, like Thales explaining earthquakes.
Not as Poseidon shaking his trident.
Right. But as the Earth floating on water and being disturbed by waves or something, that's a staggering intellectual leap.
It really is. And Heraclitus made a similar, though perhaps more abstract kind of break. He moved away from traditional mythological narratives by proposing the logos as this universal rational principle underlying all existence.
So not the gods running the show, but this inherent reason.
Exactly. Rather than attributing cosmic events or the world's order to the interventions of mythical gods, he saw an inherent, immanent reason. He was deeply engaged in that critical shift towards rational inquiry, but he pushed it into the realm of metaphysics, of universal law.
Okay. Now, there was also this big debate among the pre-Socratics. Was the universe ultimately made of one single thing, or multiple things? The whole monism versus pluralism discussion. Where did Heraclitus fit into that? Because fire sounds like one thing.
That's a fascinating question because Heraclitus kind of defies easy categorization there. On the one hand, yes, his concept of fire as the fundamental element might initially seem to lean towards monism, the idea that everything comes from one single substance. But his profound emphasis on constant change, the ceaseless transformation of fire, and especially the essential role of the unity of opposites, actually opens the door to a kind of dynamic pluralism.
How so?
For him, the unity of the cosmos wasn't a simple static sameness. It was a complex, vibrant unity formed precisely by the ongoing tension and interaction of diverse, often conflicting elements and forces.
So unity through diversity and conflict.
Exactly. So it's arguably one principle, fire, or perhaps better, logos operating through a multitude of active, opposing forces. He believed that unity emerges from conflict, not in spite of it.
And his idea of the unity of opposites, where cosmic order arises from tension. You mentioned this sounds like a very early form of dialectical thinking, which obviously became hugely influential later.
Yes, absolutely. It's a foundational step. Heraclitus's idea that cosmic order, that reality itself, emerges from the dynamic tension of opposing forces, is a primitive, maybe, but incredibly insightful form of dialectical thought.
Primitive but powerful.
Very. This recognition of inherent contradiction as a creative force, as the engine of change, really foreshadows the more developed philosophical methodologies that would emerge later with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
Who used dialogue and opposing viewpoints.
Precisely. They engaged with the interplay of ideas and opposing viewpoints to reach higher truths. Heraclitus gave us the very seed of that mode of thinking, seeking truth not in eliminating opposition, but in the synthesis that arises from it.
Okay, so Heraclitus was definitely part of the Ionian school, but he carved out a pretty unique, maybe even solitary path. How did his specific choice of fire and his really complex concept of logos truly differentiate him from those other Ionians like Thales and Anaximander and Anaximenes?
But while he's certainly contextualized within that Ionian school, his approach was profoundly distinct. Think about it. For Thales, water was, relatively speaking, a passive material arche. For Anaximander, the boundless aperon hinted at abstraction, but it was still largely conceived as a kind of primordial substance.
The stuff it all came from.
Right, and for Anaximenes, air was a material substance that transformed through fairly mechanical processes, rarefaction, condensation. Heraclitus chose fire, yes, but for him it wasn't merely a static material substance like water or air.
We keep coming back to this dynamism.
Because it's crucial. For Heraclitus, fire was a symbol of dynamic process, of constant living change and transformation itself. It embodied the very act of becoming rather than just being. It was the active principle, the cosmic energy, constantly consuming and renewing.
So it's not just what the universe is made of, but what it does and how it constantly renews itself through its own inherent instability. That's a big difference.
It's huge. Furthermore, his concept of logos significantly elevates the whole Ionian rational approach to a more abstract, universal, even metaphysical level. While Anaximander's aperon may be nudged towards an abstract principle, Heraclitus's logos explicitly defines an intelligent, governing reason that underpins all phenomena.
Making his philosophy maybe deeper, more intricate.
I think so. It makes his philosophy far more profound and intricate than many of his peers, moving beyond simple material explanations to a deeper understanding of cosmic order, inherent structure, and active process. He wasn't merely asking what the universe was made of.
But how it worked.
Exactly. How it fundamentally operated, how it structured itself through tension and change, and how it could be intelligently apprehended. He posited a rational order that was dynamic and unfolding, not static and fixed.
Okay, this sounds like it must have created some pretty significant philosophical friction with other influential thinkers of his time. Let's talk about some of those direct comparisons and rivalries. How did he stack up against Thales and Anaximander's more material-focused views?
Well, the key distinction, I think, is their fundamental philosophical focus. Thales is water and Anaximander's apeiron. They were fundamentally searches for a material or maybe quasi-material foundation of the universe.
Underlying stuff.
Right, the primordial substratum from which everything else derived. Heraclitus, in stark contrast, focused on change and process as the fundamental reality. His logo suggests a rational, dynamic order that transcends mere inert matter. It indicates that the universe is governed by an intelligent, ever-active principle, not just a static substance. For him, the archai was less about a single substance and more about the dynamic principle governing the universe's constant becoming.
And what about Anaximenes and his air theory? That seemed to provide a more sort of mechanical explanation for change, right?
Anaximenes' theory, while elegant in its simplicity, was indeed more mechanical. Air, through processes of condensation and rarefaction, becoming denser to form water, then earth, or rarer to form fire, could explain different states of matter. It's quite ingenious, actually.
But Heraclitus...
Heraclitus, however, championed the dynamic, often turbulent and inherently conflicting nature of the universe. His view wasn't about straightforward mechanical transformations of a single substance. It was about the ceaseless, generative interplay of opposing forces that constitute reality. He saw the universe as alive, vibrant, defined by this constant tension.
Not just particles changing density.
Exactly. Not merely a collection of particles undergoing physical changes based on density. His was a more profound metaphysical claim about the very essence of existence itself. It's about struggle, tension, becoming.
Okay, this next one feels huge. A crucial point of philosophical tension. Parmenides and the Eleatic school, they were contemporaries, right? Living around the same time.
Yes, broadly contemporary.
And Parmenides basically said the exact opposite of Heraclitus's core philosophy. No change.
This is arguably the most fundamental philosophical divide in ancient Greek thought, maybe in all of Western philosophy. A debate whose echoes reverberated for centuries. Parmenides, yes, a contemporary, vehemently rejected change. Completely.
Why? On what grounds?
His assertion, based on some pretty powerful logical arguments, was that true being is static, unchangeable, eternal, indivisible, one. For Parmenides, any appearance of change or motion or multiplicity was, for him, an illusion of the senses, a deception.
An illusion, so the river flowing isn't real.
Not fundamentally real, according to Parmenides. His famous argument, simplified, stated that what is not, non-being, cannot be thought or spoken of. Therefore, you can only think or speak of what is being, since change implies something coming from non-being into being, or passing from being into non-being. Change itself is logically impossible, unthinkable. Being just is. It cannot become anything else.
Wow. Okay, so Heraclitus's everything flows. Right.
Is a direct, fundamental, and utterly irreconcilable opposition to this view. For Heraclitus, change is the only constant, the very essence of reality, a continuous process of becoming. For Parmenides, change is a logical impossibility, a sensory mirage.
Polar opposites.
Completely. This created one of the most significant and enduring philosophical debates of the era, truly shaping the questions that subsequent philosophers, especially Plato, would grapple with for centuries. It's the ultimate change versus permanence showdown.
One said everything changes, the other said nothing truly changes. That's about as fundamental a disagreement as you can get. And Heraclitus wasn't a fan of Pythagoras either, was he? Another big name?
No, not at all. Heraclitus was known for his sharp criticism of Pythagoras, too. While Pythagoras and his followers were celebrated for their emphasis on mathematics, numerical harmony, a somewhat mystical worldview.
Numbers rule the universe, that kind of thing.
Right. Heraclitus seems to have found his knowledge superficial. Polymathy without real insight. Heraclitus, with his focus on the dynamic, the conflict-oriented, the inherent tensions of existence. He saw Pythagoras as someone who had maybe gathered a lot of disparate information, but lacked true, unifying understanding of the deeper dynamic logos.
All surface, no depth.
That seems to be the critique. He reportedly said something scathing like, Pythagoras practiced inquiry more than all other men, and selecting from these writings made himself a wisdom of his own. Much learning, artful knavery.
Ouch. Artful knavery. He didn't mince words.
Not Heraclitus. It was a critique, essentially, of breadth without true depth, of accumulating facts without discerning the underlying unifying dynamic principle.
Okay. So pulling it all together for this section,
Right.
what were the overarching questions that really shaped the philosophy of this time, this pre-Socratic era, and how did Heraclitus, through his unique lens, provide his answers?
Well, the big questions, the ones that profoundly shaped the philosophy of the time, revolved around maybe three main points. First, what is the origin, the arche, of the universe? Where does it all come from?
Right, the starting point.
Second, how can change and continuity, the fact that things seem to change constantly, yet also seem to persist, how can those be explained simultaneously in a coherent way? That's the Parmenides-Heraclitus tension right there.
The paradox of change.
Exactly. And third, to what extent can human reason actually grasp the universe's ultimate nature? Can we truly know reality?
Good questions.
Huge. And Heraclitus, through his concepts of logos as the universal principle, constant change embodied by fire, and the generative power of the unity of opposites, he offered truly unique and profound answers. He both continued the quest of his pre-Socratic predecessors, searching for that arche.
By choosing fire.
Right. But he also radically broke away from them. His emphasis on fire as a symbol of dynamic process, and his assertion that universal unity emerges precisely from the essential role of opposites, pushed the boundaries of pre-Socratic thought way beyond just finding the basic stuff. He set the stage for future philosophical developments that would grapple with the nature of becoming, the role of conflict, and the deep paradoxes of existence for centuries to come.
He gave the era a philosophical language, maybe, for understanding dynamism and tension not just as problems, but as inherent, even positive parts of cosmic order.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Not imperfections to be overcome, but the very engine of reality.
So we've explored Heraclitus's enigmatic mind, his turbulent world, and his really radical position among his pre-Socratic peers. But his ideas didn't just vanish into the mists of time after he supposedly left his work in the Temple of Artemis, did they?
Oh, far from it.
Far from it. His influence echoed through centuries, deeply impacting later Greek philosophy and, remarkably, even resonating powerfully in modern thought.
Indeed, his ideas were just too profound, too challenging to be ignored. Take Plato, for instance. Plato certainly wrestled deeply with Heraclitus' idea of constant change.
The world of flux.
Exactly. Plato often used Heraclitus' ideas to characterize the sensory world. The world we experience through our senses is perpetually in flux, just like Heraclitus' river. Now, ultimately, Plato argued for a higher, unchanging realm of perfect forms that existed beyond this sensory world of flux.
The real reality for Plato.
Right. But, importantly, Plato was also profoundly influenced by Heraclitus' dialectical method, the idea of reaching truth through the clash and reconciliation of opposing ideas. He employed that extensively in his own famous dialogues.
So even while arguing against constant flux as ultimate reality, he used a method that echoed Heraclitus.
In a sense, yes. Plato understood that to truly ascend to knowledge of the unchanging forms, one must first grapple with and understand the flux of the sensible world. Heraclitus provided a powerful framework for that understanding, even if Plato ultimately pointed beyond it. And Aristotle, too, while he often found Heraclitus' ideas about constant change to be a source of logical paradox and contradiction.
Aristotle liked things neat and tidy.
He did prefer clear categories, but he nonetheless engaged with Heraclitus' ideas at length in his own systematic philosophy, showing their undeniable philosophical weight. He categorized Heraclitus' position as a significant challenge to the very notion of substance and stability, something that needed to be addressed.
So even his critics took him very seriously. And then the Stoics, they really embraced Heraclitus' concept of logos wholeheartedly, didn't they? It became absolutely central to their whole philosophy.
They absolutely did. Stoicism, which became a major philosophical school flourishing centuries after Heraclitus, wholeheartedly adopted and significantly developed his concept of logos.
How did they develop it?
For the Stoics, the logos became the universal reason, the divine, intelligent, guiding principle that permeates and orders the entire cosmos. They believed this logos was responsible for the inherent rationality and order of the universe.
It's a cosmic mind.
Almost, yeah. And crucially, they believed that human reason was a spark or a fragment of this universal logos.
So we have a piece of it within us.
Exactly. Consequently, they advocated for a life lived in harmony with this universal nature, guided by reason, understanding that aligning oneself with the logos was the path to virtue, to tranquility, to living well.
Living according to nature or reason.
Precisely. And this was a direct, profound lineage straight from Heraclitus' original insight. They transformed it into a guiding principle for ethical living and for understanding our place in the universe.
It's truly incredible, isn't it, how these ancient ideas, these cryptic fragments, just transcended their original context and kept shaping philosophical inquiry. And if we fast forward centuries into modern thought, we see Heraclitus popping up again, particularly with really transformative philosophers like Hegel.
Indeed. The German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel, a titan of 19th century philosophy, may be one of the most complex thinkers ever. He famously praised Heraclitus' dialectical thinking. He even declared him one of the greatest thinkers of antiquity for grasping it so early.
What did Hegel see in him?
Hegel saw Heraclitus' idea of the unity of opposites, that reality progresses through the tension and resolution of contradictions, and the idea of constant process, constant becoming, as a fundamental blueprint for his own incredibly complex philosophical system.
Hegel's famous dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Exactly. In Hegel's system, ideas and history evolve through this dynamic process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That concept directly echoes Heraclitus' view that conflict is the father of all things. Hegel recognized Heraclitus as a crucial precursor to his own grand theory of historical and logical development. He saw him as maybe the first to truly grasp the dynamic, evolving, contradictory nature of reality.
Wow, high praise from Hegel. And another profoundly influential German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. He also had a great deal of admiration for Heraclitus, didn't he?
He certainly did. Nietzsche, the hugely influential 19th century philosopher, greatly admired Heraclitus precisely for his embrace of flux, conflict, and becoming.
Why did that appeal to Nietzsche?
Nietzsche saw Heraclitus as a powerful antidote to what he perceived as the, well, life-denying tendencies in later Western philosophy, particularly those that emphasize static truths or tried to escape from the messy reality of the material world.
The philosophies that sought permanence.
Right. For Nietzsche, Heraclitus was a philosopher who championed change, dynamism, the raw vitality of life itself, rather than seeking solace in static, unchanging ideals or rigid moral absolutes. Heraclitus' philosophy, for Nietzsche, represented this powerful affirmation of the ever-flowing, ever-becoming nature of existence, a philosophy that embraced the will to power, the inherent necessary conflict within life, rather than denying it or trying to somehow escape it.
Facing reality head-on.
Exactly. Nietzsche saw Heraclitus as someone who looked reality square in the eye, with all its inherent contradictions and struggles, and found beauty and power within them, not despite them.
So, Heraclitus, the obscure philosopher. Listening to all this, it really feels like that nickname wasn't meant as a criticism, was it? It sounds more like a profound recognition of the depth and the complexity of his ideas, almost like a badge of honor.
I think that's exactly right. It wasn't meant to diminish him, but rather to highlight the profound, often challenging, multi-layered nature of his thought. His insights weren't easily digestible bites. They weren't for the sleeping masses, as he might have put it.
They demand work.
They demand deep contemplation, intellectual rigor, and a willingness to look beyond surface appearances, beyond easy answers. We can probably conclude by emphasizing that this darkness or obscurity ultimately contained a profound light, a guiding principle, the logos, that sought to illuminate the universe's deepest mysteries.
And that light keeps shining.
That light continues to shape philosophical thought centuries later, forcing us to truly engage with the very nature of reality, reminding us again and again that true understanding often requires looking past the obvious to find that hidden harmony humming within constant change.
And there you have it, our deep dive into the enigmatic mind of Heraclitus of Ephesus. We've journeyed through the constant flow of Pantarei, we've explored the unifying yet dynamic power of Logos, and we've tried to truly grasp how cosmic order arises from the vibrant, essential tension of the unity of opposites.
And, his ancient ideas are surprisingly, maybe even startlingly, relevant to our modern experience, aren't they?
How so?
Well, think about the constant, often overwhelming change and contradictions we experience in our daily lives. Everything from rapid technological shifts to our own personal growth and setbacks, from global conflicts to evolving social norms. It's constant flux.
It definitely feels that way sometimes.
Heraclitus provides this profound framework for understanding that flux not as just chaos or something to be feared, but as an inherent, even necessary part of existence. His philosophy offers a lens through which to view the world, one that maybe prepares us for and helps us understand this relentless process of becoming.
Finding order in the flow, maybe?
Or at least understanding the nature of the flow itself.
So, as you, our listener, go about your day, perhaps seeing a bit more clearly now the constant motion around you, and maybe even within you, Consider this. If conflict is indeed the father of all things, as Heraclitus claimed, what new truths, what new forms, what new understanding might emerge from the tensions you face in your own life?
Hmm, that's a deep question.
And how might understanding the ever-present dynamic lodos, that unifying reason inherent in the universe, the hidden harmony, how might that help you navigate that ceaseless flow, finding your balance not in stasis, not in standing still, but right there in the very heart of change?